The year was 1954. The place was Dien. It was a remote valley in northwestern Vietnam, a name that would soon echo around the world. For months, the French Union forces had fortified this isolated outpost. They believed it was impregnable. They called it a land air base, a fortress designed to lure the Viet Minh into a decisive, set-piece battle. The French commander, General Henri Navarre, was confident. He thought his superior firepower would crush any assault. He had artillery, he had aircraft, he had well-trained soldiers dug into a series of strongpoints named after his mistresses, Gabrielle, Beatrice, Isabel. But he had underestimated his enemy. He had underestimated the will of a people fighting for their independence. The monsoon rains began early that year. They turned the rich, red earth of the valley into a thick, clinging mud. It was a sea of sludge that swallowed boots, bogged down vehicles, and made every movement an exhausting struggle. The sky was a constant weeping gray, a miserable shroud that hung low over the mountains. For the French soldiers huddled in their waterlogged trenches and bunkers, the weather was just another enemy. It brought dampness, disease, and a pervasive sense of gloom. Visibility was poor. The air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay. This valley, meant to be a trap for the Viet Minh, was slowly becoming a prison for the French. In the surrounding hills, something extraordinary was happening. Hidden beneath the dense jungle canopy, an entire army was gathering. General Vo Nguyen Giap, the brilliant Viet Minh commander, was orchestrating a logistical masterpiece. Tens of thousands of civilian porters, men and women, carried supplies on their backs and on reinforced bicycles. They moved in near total silence, often at night, along hidden trails carved into the mountainside. They brought rice, ammunition, and most astonishingly, heavy artillery pieces. They had disassembled massive 105mm howitzers, carried them piece by piece over treacherous mountain passes, and reassembled them in camouflaged positions that overlooked the French fortress. The French were completely unaware. They believed the terrain made it impossible to bring such heavy guns to bear. They were wrong. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change the course of history. It was more than just a battle. It was a clash of two worlds. On one side, a colonial power, confident in its modern military machine, desperately trying to hold on to its empire. On the other, a nationalist movement, fueled by decades of resentment and a burning desire for freedom. The French soldiers waited in their muddy fortress, scanning the silent jungle-covered hills. The Viet Minh soldiers watched from above, patiently waiting for the order to attack. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the quiet before a storm that would shake the foundations of colonialism and signal the beginning of its end. The valley was ready. On the afternoon of March 13, 1954, the storm finally broke. A stunning, terrifying barrage of Viet Minh artillery shells rained down on the French positions. The first target was the strong point known as Beatrice. The French were caught by complete surprise. The accuracy and intensity of the shelling were beyond anything they had imagined possible. Bunkers collapsed, command posts were obliterated. The commander of the French artillery and his entire staff were killed in the opening moments. The Viet Minh had achieved perfect tactical surprise. General Giap had carefully positioned his guns in deep, camouflaged emplacements, making them nearly impossible for French counter-battery fire to locate. The valley floor, once a symbol of French strength, was now a killing field. As the artillery barrage lifted, the assault began. From the dark jungle, thousands of Vietnamese soldiers emerged. They were a sea of green uniforms and simple pith helmets, men who had known little but war for years. They moved with a disciplined determination, charging forward through the mud and the mangled barbed wire. They were not a disorganized mob. This was a well-planned attack. Giap's strategy was to strike hard and fast at the outer strongpoints, isolating them one by one before tightening the noose on the central command area. The soldiers carried bamboo scaling ladders, explosives, and a fierce resolve. They were the human wave, a term the French used, but it failed to capture the courage and sacrifice of these men. The Viet Minh soldiers were a product of their land and their struggle. Many were peasant farmers, accustomed to hardship and deeply connected to the soil they were fighting to liberate. Their uniforms were simple, practical, cotton-dyed jungle green, providing camouflage against the lush vegetation. The iconic pith helmet, adopted from their colonial rulers, had become a symbol of their own national army. They were lightly equipped compared to the French, often armed with a mix of Chinese, Soviet, and captured French weapons. But what they lacked in material, they made up for in sheer numbers, ingenuity, and an unshakable belief in their cause. They knew the terrain intimately, using it to their advantage to move unseen and strike from unexpected directions. The strategy was methodical and relentless. General Giap employed a tactic of gnawing away at the French defenses. It was a brutal siege. The attacks came in waves, often at night under the cover of darkness and relentless shelling. The Viet Minh would dig extensive networks of trenches, slowly inching their way closer and closer to the French lines until they were close enough to launch a final assault. Each yard of ground was paid for in blood. The soldiers faced a curtain of machine gun fire and mortar rounds, yet they kept coming. Their objective was clear: to overwhelm the defenders through relentless pressure and unwavering sacrifice, to prove that the will of a determined people could defeat a technologically superior army. The battle devolved into a primal chaos of noise and violence. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the constant thunder of explosions. Viet Minh artillery shells screeched overhead before slamming into the French positions, sending geysers of mud, metal, and human remains into the air. The French fought back with their own big guns, their shells tearing into the hillsides, trying in vain to silence the hidden Viet Minh batteries. The valley was shrouded in a thick, acrid smoke that burned the eyes and choked the lungs. It was a gray-black fog of war, a mixture of cordite, dust, and the smoke from burning equipment, a haze that obscured everything and made the world feel small and terrifying. Through this infernal landscape, the battle raged. The fighting was intimate and savage. It took place in narrow trenches, in collapsed bunkers, and over shattered barricades. Soldiers on both sides experienced the extremes of human emotion. There was the stark terror of an incoming artillery round, the feeling of utter helplessness as the earth shook. But there was also incredible courage. French paratroopers, the elite of their army, launched desperate counterattacks to retake lost ground. Vietnamese infantrymen strapped explosives to their bodies and threw themselves against concrete bunkers in acts of ultimate sacrifice. It was a crucible where bravery and fear lived side by side, in every foxhole, in every heart. The constant rain made the nightmare worse. The trenches filled with a soupy mixture of water and blood. Wounded men drowned in the mud where they fell. The conditions were hellish, a constant struggle against not only the enemy, but also the elements. Disease spread rapidly through the besieged garrison. The French airstrip, their only lifeline to the outside world, was destroyed by Viet Minh artillery early in the battle. From then on, supplies and reinforcements could only be dropped by parachute, and much of it drifted into enemy territory. The sense of isolation and hopelessness within the French camp grew with each passing day. They were trapped, with the enemy closing in from all sides. For 56 days and nights, this inferno burned. The battlefield was a landscape from a nightmare, littered with the debris of war and the bodies of the fallen. The once beautiful valley had become a pockmarked wasteland, scarred by craters and trenches. The relentless noise of combat was a constant assault on the senses, a symphony of destruction that never seemed to end. It was a battle of attrition, a test of endurance. General Giap knew his forces could withstand the losses and the hardship. The French, cut off and demoralized, were slowly being ground down, their will to fight eroding with every shell that fell and every position that was lost. By early May, the end was near. The Viet Minh had systematically captured nearly all the outlying French strongpoints. Their trenches now crisscrossed the entire valley floor, tightening the stranglehold on the central command bunker where the French commander, General Christian de Castries, and his staff held out. The final assault was launched on May 6th, a massive human wave attack, supported by a final thunderous artillery barrage, overwhelmed the last pockets of resistance. The fighting was desperate, hand-to-hand in the last few yards of trench. The French, exhausted, out of ammunition, and with no hope of relief, could fight no more. The battle had been lost. On the afternoon of May 7, 1954, a profound silence began to fall over the valley. The shooting sputtered and died out. Then, a moment that would be seared into the memory of a nation. A small group of Viet Minh soldiers scrambled to the top of the rubble of de Castries' command bunker. They raised a large red flag with a single gold star in its center. The flag, though simple, was a powerful symbol. It fluttered in the breeze over the smoldering ruins, a declaration of victory that was seen across the hills. It represented the culmination of a 9-year war for independence. It was a symbol of incredible sacrifice, national pride, and the final, undeniable defeat of a colonial power. For the soldiers of General Vo Nguyen Giap, the moment was one of overwhelming emotion. Cheers erupted from the trenches and the hillsides. Men who had endured unimaginable hardship for weeks wept openly. They embraced one another, their faces streaked with mud and tears of joy. They had achieved the impossible. They, a peasant army, had defeated a modern European force in a conventional, set-piece battle. Their pride was immense. They had not just won a battle, they had won their country's freedom. The victory at Dien Bien Phu proved to the world that a determined people, united in their cause, could triumph over a seemingly invincible foe. The victory had immediate and far-reaching consequences. The very next day, the Geneva Conference convened to discuss the future of Indochina. The French defeat at Dien Bien Phu broke their political will to continue the war. It led directly to the Geneva Accords, which partitioned Vietnam into North and South and marked the end of French colonial rule. For Vietnam, it was a moment of supreme triumph, a cornerstone of its modern identity. For the world, it was a powerful lesson. It sent shockwaves through colonial empires everywhere and inspired independence movements across Asia and Africa. The battle fought in that muddy valley had redrawn the map of Southeast Asia and changed the course of the 20th century.